Hi, this is a video that's going to help you use Fusion 360 to actually carve a virtual pumpkin. This is the end result viewed through the 360 web viewer. And we're going to actually create this in Fusion 360 using the sculpt mode. And then we're going to actually convert that back to a body and configure three different bodies. Here we'll do a body, a top, and a stem so that you can actually carve the pumpkin and actually put something inside if you wanted to do that. All right, so let's get started. So we start with the typical Fusion 360 dashboard. In this case, we're going to create a new design and go right into the form area. We're going to use the sculpt area, not the model area, which will give us the ability to really create a very interesting shape and move it around and so forth. So we're going to start with a cylinder. We're going to create a cylinder 6 inches in diameter just to start. And then what we're going to do is adjust the number of diameter faces to 8. Put the height maybe 6 to start. We'll stretch that out later. The number of height faces 8, and then symmetric faces to 4. And this will give us the ability to do what we need to do. Now there's some interesting tabs around the cylinder that you can change the number of faces this way as well. We just use the table there over there to put that in. So this is the way you start. The symmetric faces will be important, as you'll see in a few minutes. So this is we're in the form area and we're viewing the cylinder. What we're going to want to do is adjust the dimensions of each of those lines. And we're starting with the select. We're looking to see that the select through tab is clicked, because when we select a line like this very bottom line here, we want to select the whole bottom of the cylinder. We don't want to just select the lines that are in view from the front. So this will give us the ability, when we adjust, we can squeeze the whole bottom of that cylinder down. So we're going to use this feature, edit form, and then use these functions to really shape the pumpkin any way you really want to. So you can have some fun with this, moving it out and in and stretching it up and down. We're going to use the top two concentric circles as the stem. So we're going to shrink those down kind of pretty narrow. There's a couple of ways you can do this. You could do it with the whole form, where it has all the faces, or you can do it just by selecting the edge, and that's the one that gives us a little more control. So we're going to do it that way. So just shrink that down to something that just leaves a little bit of a, what would look reasonable as a stem to the pumpkin. Now we're going to, just play around with all the different concentric circles to figure out what's the right shape, and we can stretch it up and down and in. While we're in the mesh mode, in the sculpt mode, we'll have the most flexibility there. So have some fun with this. If you find that your pumpkin is only stretching in one part, not the whole thing around, go back to select and make sure that you have selected all through, and that way it'll connect all the lines that are behind the line that you see there on the front. So we're just going to move this around, select a pumpkin shape that makes sense. I would suggest do something that makes your pumpkin unique to your design, but and you can play around with some of the function keys that you see there. By the way, the symmetry lines that we set up in the very beginning are those dotted gold and yellow lines that come down. And we'll go back to those later, but that's important because we want to be able to create a symmetry so that when we adjust any of those special symmetry lines, all the lines follow the same moving feature. So that'll be important when we want to make the wrinkles in the pumpkin uniform across the face. And there's one more function in that edit form. You may have seen it pop up, extrude. You can actually extrude and create a new face in this area. You just have to hit on the Mac keyboard, you hit the Alt button and then move that. Like I'm doing here, I'm not using the Alt, but if you wanted to play around with the Alt, you'd actually see something new being created. You can use that for some very interesting things as well. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I think we're ready to do the to kind of shrink in the wrinkles in the pumpkin. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to select and hit on the Mac Command and select all the lines down the front of the pumpkin. You don't have to select the ones at the very bottom, and leave the ones at the top open as well. But that's going to give you the ability to really put the texture in the pumpkin. So now go back, select the arrow that's pointed out toward you, and then we're just going to push in. And you can see the pumpkin now starts to take form. You look at it from the top, that's probably a little too much. So let's move it out a little bit and give it a little more of a realistic view. So that looks pretty good. Now we're going to do the same thing with the stem. The stem, we want to give a little bit of texture too, so we're going to select on the very front of the pumpkin, we're going to select the two vertical lines right there, holding down the command line or command key first so that you get both at the same time, and then just push that in just slightly. What you want to be careful of is don't push it too much. You don't want any of the edges to overlap, otherwise you can never create a model based on this. So give it a little bit of character there, and now we're going to just select the very top line, and we're going to use the fill hole feature, and it's going to put a nice hole on the top of the pumpkin, or fill the hole on the top of the stem. Okay. Now we're going to play around with moving this around. That you can do anything you want here. We're going to take the symmetry away so that we don't have any unexpected changes. But once we take the symmetry away, we can still use the sculpting capability and stretch the pumpkin in some fun ways. Okay, so let's select the part of the stem that we could use to move around. So now we're going to do a edit form on that portion. Now you know we've selected the whole stem. We're selecting both sides, and now we can rotate and do some kind of interesting things. So let's give it a little bit of a slant, move it around a little bit. That looks pretty good. Now maybe the pumpkin doesn't, really need to be as symmetric as it is. So let's stretch it up a little bit more, give it a little more height. Now we can do some interesting things here. We can move it around and give it a little more of a natural shape, perhaps. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And you'll notice when you try to select things, sometimes you can select more than you really want, so you can just continue to look and see what gets highlighted. Now I can move this around even more and just select the faces that I want to stretch. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So now we're going to save this and name this file. Let's call it pumpkin. Maybe we'll make sure we have a new project for this. So you can click down at the bottom, create new project. We're going to call it pumpkin carving project. That way all the files that you're using are in the right collection. Okay, so now name your pumpkin. What we're doing here is we're creating a copy that's in the mesh sculpt version. So if we ever need to come back, we can come back and modify it. So now we're going to finish the form. If when you do this, if it says you have an error, it means you've probably done some things with the symmetry shrinking that you need to go back and look at. But hopefully it all converted correctly. Let's save it one more time so that we have a record of the model once we moved it back to model mode. And we're going to save it and call it model. That way, I'll go back to it if we need to. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take the pumpkin. Right now, it's a shell, all one body, and we're going to carve and cut off the top. So just like you would in a normal pumpkin, you would cut a hole in the top. We're going to do that here. We're going to create a construction plane that is parallel to the very bottom of the pumpkin, and this is going to be the line at which we're going to cut the top off the pumpkin. So just put it up there where you think is good. We'll just create that construction plane there. And now what we're going to use is we're going to go back in the create or the modify area, split the body on that construction plane. So you can select the body, and then what's easy to do is just select the construction plane over on the left, and that way that's the plane at which you're going to split the body. So you can take a look at it, make sure that's where you want it to. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So that'll give us an opening in the top of the pumpkin. And now we have two bodies. We have, and we can name them. We could call that the top, and we could call that the bottom. But we have one more cut to make. We want to cut the stem. Even though we won't necessarily ever detach the stem, we want to create a separate body so that we can color it differently than the rest. So to cut the stem, I'm going to go into sketch mode and create a line on the vertical plane. So I'm going to select the vertical plane, and I'm going to draw a line that gives me the ability to kind of do what we just did, split the body. I'm going to split that very top body at a point where I want the stem to be, a green stem. So now I'm going to stop the sketch. Now I've got a line that's in the vertical plane, and now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to go back and say split body on that line, and now I have two bodies, actually three bodies now. I have a stem, I have a top, and then I have a body. So I'm going to go ahead and just type that in, because when we move it to another program to do some other things, it's just as easy to have the names there correctly. Now the body is still a shell. If we want to carve it, it's not going to show any thickness. So what we need to do is kind of hide the top and the stem and look inside the pumpkin. And we're going to use a feature called thicken, which creates a thickness to a surface. So there it is right there. We're going to click that, and we're going to use a minus quarter of an inch. And that looks pretty good. You can make it thicker if you want. You could make it thinner, but you want it to be able to show some thickness, so when you do the carving, it looks like a pumpkin. So that looks pretty good. So here we go. We're going to create a construction plane off the vertical plane of the origin. I'll turn on the construction plane so I can see it. And now just take the construction plane out just far enough so that it's out beyond the face of the pumpkin. That way, when we put some text on it, it'll be out far enough, and then, of course, we're going to extrude and cut into the pumpkin after we create the sketch. So now you select the construction plane. We're going to select text, and we're going to just put an initial point there and then type in whatever you want. This is something you control over the side. I'm going to use a height of maybe 2 inches. That looks pretty good compared to the pumpkin size, and you can pick whatever font you want. So it looks pretty good. And that's going to now be out in front and purely just for constructing the carving. So we'll stop the sketch. We will go back in and now do a push-pull or press-pull and carve the pumpkin. And if you want, I would suggest go ahead and do something in the back. Maybe put your initials in the back or name in the back so that there's something to personalize the pumpkin for you. Okay, so now we have a carved pumpkin. That looks pretty good, except that we need to figure out how to color that. And so let's go into appearances. Now, if we search for texture, there in the standard Fusion 360, there's not a lot of texture. There's not a pumpkin texture. So if you look at some different plastics, they look pretty good. So if you zoom in, you can kind of see what that texture looks like. Random looks pretty good. We'll test another one and see what polka dot looks like. Probably not for a pumpkin here. There's what regular looks like. And then skin has a little bit of a different texture. So let's try random, and that looks like a little irregular texture. We'll put that texture on all of the faces, all the bodies, and now we just have to color them. So there happens to be a green color in the standard powder coat. So we're going to do a powder coat rough, because we don't really want a shiny pumpkin. And we're going to color the stem green. So that works pretty well. The problem is there's not an orange in the standard colors. So what we're going to do is we're going to select a color and then actually make it an orange color. So we're going to take green and we're going to duplicate it. So right click on the color up there. Now we've created another appearance object here. And we're going to actually just change that to be orange. Now you can pick whatever color you want. There is kind of an interesting thing is you can use the Pantone libraries of many, many colors. Or you can just pick it off the color wheel. Pantone colors are 16-1260 if you want to use that one, or you can use whatever you like. Now we have an orange pumpkin color, and we can use that to color the two bodies there, the top and the body. Oh, I forgot to save it, so it shouldn't be a green pumpkin here. So let's go back in and edit that feature. There we go. There we go. That looks better. All right. So there you have a carved pumpkin in Fusion 360.